Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. We're streaming live from the Boathouse at Confluence Park. We also are welcoming an in-house audience today for our forum. And it is the first forum of the Columbus Metropolitan Club's new fiscal year. And I cannot pretend that I'm glad to close the books on what was at least the first few months of 2020. We are live streamed today thanks to our live stream partners, the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. We also would like to thank those of you who purchased virtual seats for today's forum. We're very grateful for this support and are able to continue our live streaming largely because of your support. Thank you very much. Today's forum, Back to School Toolkit for Everyone, is part of our Optimal Health series presented by OSU Wexner Medical Center and Nationwide Children's Hospital, with additional support for today's forum from Spectrum. Please help me thank them. For many folks, school and work are returning, but nothing's normal. And how can we stay resilient? Well, flexibility is the key, and strategies for maintaining good physical and mental health while coping with an ever-changing reality are essential. Our panel today will discuss how to approach the many challenges and what a toolkit for wellness looks like at home and at work and today. So maybe we should ask, what's in your backpack? So let's welcome Superintendent of Columbus City Schools, Dr. Talisa Dixon. Thank you, Dr. Dixon, for being here. Clinical Director of On Our Sleeves at Nationwide Children's Hospital, Dr. Parker Houston. Dr. Houston, thank you. Family Ambassador for Ecole Kenwood PTO, Amanda McClafferty. Amanda, thank you. And our host for our whole Optimal Health series, Interim Director of Professional Development at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University, Greg Moody. Thank you, Greg. It's all yours.
Thank you, Jane. Well, March is not that long ago. We scrambled to go online. We stayed home for work and school. School events were canceled, games, prom, graduation. We felt that loss, but also thought that by now COVID would be under control, but it's not. We want to get back to normal, back to school, but that's balanced against our anxiety and fear about coronavirus. On top of that, unresolved issues of systemic racism and an economic downturn add to the stress many families are feeling. These feelings build up, welling up in us like grief, sometimes spilling over as anger, denial, sadness. As parents and educators, we want to tell our children it's okay, but they sense we're unsure. What do? How do households build resilience today to navigate through uncertainty going forward? As a parent of a high school junior, I am so glad to be here with this panel. Please reintroduce yourself, say a little bit about your official role, but I also hope you will reflect on your personal experience with resiliency and offer your best advice to our audience. Dr. Dixon?
Thank you. Talisa Dixon, Superintendent, Columbus City Schools. This is, if we stated over and over, unprecedented time for our students and our families. But for me personally, when I think about resilience, how do we bounce back? How do I ensure that our students and families and our teachers, our staff, still have hope? Hope that there is going to be a cure, hope there's a better tomorrow, hope that when we open up our doors for our students, that our students will feel good about coming back. And so for me personally, when I think about what has happened the past months for me, it has been some tragedies. Just a little tidbit, my father had been dealing with prostate cancer for many years. I had received a call and I had to return home to Oxford, Mississippi on March 6th, and my father passed March 8th. And so I had to come back to Columbus, and the schools were closed, and had to still have a smile and speak a message of hope. and instill into our organization that we will get through this, even though I was personally hurting and grieving. But that's what our kids do. Our kids are going to come back hopeful. They're going to come back with goals, dreams, and aspirations, and we have to make sure that there's a safe environment, a safe place for them to talk about the things that they've endured these past few months, and we're going to talk about those, but also that we understand that everyone has faced some sort of traumatic experience with this, if it's of our adults or students, but we together can get through this, and we have to have empathy and understand that everyone across this country has faced something we've never seen before, but together, that's what makes us stronger. Together, we recognize what has happened. When we return back to our schools, we talk about it and we have those conversations, because building relationships and talking about what has happened must happen first before we start teaching math and science and social studies and English. So we have a job to do our first day when we return, and that is to just get in there, build those relationships, talk about what's happening, and tell kids that we're glad you're back, even in front of a computer for our students in Columbus City Schools. But we are here, and we're going to get through this together, and that's what I'm most excited about.
It's fantastic. Thank you. Dr. Houston.
Yeah, really well said, Dr. Dixon. So I'm Parker Houston. I'm a clinical psychologist and pediatric psychologist at the Children's Hospital here in Columbus. And I'm also the clinical director of a program called On Our Sleeves, which is a program that's really hoping to lead a movement across the country to demystify and bring more awareness to childhood mental health in general. And we're doing that through providing as much free education, resources, activities, and public speaking engagements like this to just bring more awareness and to provide resources to anyone who's willing and interested in listening and participating. So we partner with local, regional, and national partners to create really interesting and hopefully attention-grabbing resources for parents to use at home, and I'll talk about some of those maybe in a little bit. We also partner with some educational groups to create materials for teachers to use in classrooms, and I feel like that's been where my mind has spent a lot of time leading up to the school year, is trying to help teachers be prepared for teaching in a way that none of them have ever done before, and most of them were not prepared for. And so I've kind of been wearing two hats over the past several months, because I do have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old who are at those school ages where they're confused about why am I not going and why am I going to go sometime and why is it not safe, but some things are safe, and how am I going to get to know my friends and teachers this year. And so on the professional side, I'm trying to think big and trying to think about how we can reach the most people possible and how to provide lots of information to families and teachers about preparing kids to be more resilient and more prepared for a strange school year this year. On the home front, I'm trying to manage, 2 kids and help my wife to navigate through all of this while working. And so I think that's given me a really unique perspective that hopefully has helped me in my work and helped me in developing and answering some of the questions that have been posed to me. And so my personal passions, what got me into doing this type of work, is in really building emotional and mental wellness in the population. And so I feel like that's a topic in an area that there's a lot of scientific evidence and a lot of evidence-based ways to do that that doesn't tend to be the focus of psychology in general. We tend to focus on mental illness and what to do when there's a problem identified, because our system is pretty burdened, and we have a lot of work work to do in those areas as well. But for someone like me, I have such a large reach, and Nationwide Children's Hospital has afforded me this platform to be able to reach a large audience and really provide as much education as possible that people can build up these resources. We can start really early with open and honest conversations with our children and with each other as adults about mental health, and that we can focus on building up, as we're talking today, an emotional toolkit and a resiliency toolkit that will benefit kids not only in really unprecedented times like now, but thinking 5 years from now, when this is hopefully a thing that we think of as history, what's the next thing that we're going to have to face, and what's the next time that our children will need to be resilient, and so thinking long term as well.
Thank you. Amanda.
My name is Amanda McClafferty. I act as the family ambassador for A. Cole Kenwood French Immersion, which is a Columbus City school. We're a lottery school, which means that we have students from all over the city of Columbus, not just our neighborhood. Family ambassadors are through the Department of Family and Community Engagement, and our role is basically to foster more involvement, more activity with families in the schools, with families in the district, and also with community members, making sure that they find those connections within schools that may work, those relationships that may work for them. So normally, my day would consist of working with families, working with parents, making sure they understand what's happening in the school, what's happening in the district, and then again making those community connections. When the pandemic started, that role quickly shifted into kind of trauma care, and the family ambassadors came together. We said, what do we need to do right now to make sure our families are receiving everything that they need, the basics of life. And there were needs for food resources. There were needs for childcare resources for our families who were working on the front lines. And so we had to quickly start gathering resources in the community to pass along to families. And in that time, you realize how much of a safety net school is for so many children and families, that school is where you go to get at least 2 meals a day. School is where you go to get that hug in the morning, that affirmation that you're going to have a great day. And for families, that's where you send your child to know that they're safe and know that they're taken care of and know that they're learning. So when those things break down, what do you do? And that's really where that community piece comes in, is making sure that school communities are coming together, making sure you're taking care of your own families, and stepping in. So for the first several weeks, and maybe even months, that was our role, to make sure that families learned about the pandemic EBT cards, that they learned about free food resources, that they knew that there were mental health resources provided through Children's Hospital, because again, this is trauma for kids. As the summer has moved on, those needs have shifted for families. As people are going back to work, that need looks more like, what do I do with my kids now that I have to go back to work and they're working from home? So where can we find childcare resources? What daycares are offering older child activities for kids? And so just making sure that we have those resources to provide to families as quickly as possible. And one of the biggest obstacles with that is that for Columbus, we have so many international families where, when you're sending your kid to school, there are ELL teachers or there are translators. You can work with someone at the school to understand what's happening. Once you're away from that building, then you're relying on emails and what's posted on online. So making sure that those families with the greatest needs are provided with the resources that they need when they need them has really been our focus. And we're ready to move forward. We're ready to teach everyone how to use the online programs if they have questions. We're ready to go as best we can. So I'm excited to send my kid back to school virtually. I have a fourth grader and then a freshman in high school. So I love them, but they need to go to school.
Well, I like absorbing the strength of your approach, because you each expressed a real hopefulness. But you're also calling it calling it like it is. I mean, there are things here to not shy away from. So in conversations directly with children, our own children or for teachers in the classroom, how do you conduct those conversations? What do you say? What questions do you ask in that direct communication with children in our community?
What we've done in Columbus, we pushed back the start of the school year to September 8th to provide 10 days of professional development for our staff, teaching them some of those tools. We want them to be able to facilitate honest dialogues with our students. You know, when they come back and say, how are you? How was your summer? What are some of the challenges? You know, what do you want to talk about? For Columbus City students, it may be, let's talk about the racial injustices that we've seen, right? The riots, the things that is happening right here in the city. Let's talk about it. We have to make sure we get our teachers the tools to talk about it, right? And how to respond. Our students have to talk about those things. And we cannot expect that they come back to school without those questions. You know, our teachers are so important to our students, even though our families are our first teachers, right? Our parents, they have relationships, trusting relationship with their peers and with their teachers. So when all of this was happening across our city, across the United States, we saw the COVID, with this coronavirus, and then we saw all of this racial injustices happening. Usually students can come back to school and say, hey, what happened? Or teachers can plan a lesson to talk about it. That didn't happen. So we have to be able to say, we're going to talk about, race. We're going to talk about mental health. And some families, it's taboo to talk about mental health issues, right? So we have to confront those up front and be honest and say that we're going to talk about it. We're going to have honest dialogues. I may not have all the answers for you, but at least you're going to be heard. And the same with our adults. How do we make sure that we have a platform for our adults to talk about their challenges? Our teachers, there are a lot of fears when we talk about this virus, and how to make sure that our students are still learning. As a superintendent, we were saying, okay, we're going to move to this online platform. We have to make sure our students are still learning math and science and social studies. But the other piece is, are kids really ready for that? Our kids dealing with trauma, and we have to deal with our families and making sure our families and kids are safe and have those basic needs like food, shelter, and all that, and then learning comes, right? So I think, to start, have those honest dialogues with our families and our students, and then we can, and maybe use some of those dialogues to have an educational experience, right? And have students maybe, hey, let's write a song, let's do some political cartoons, let's do some things that we can, that would help as Mr. Houston said, Dr. Houston said, that would help students cope not just now, but in the future. So I think those are some things that are important for us.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm going to recruit Dr. Dixon to come work for us after she finishes her time with the schools, because that's right on what we as mental health professionals think, which is, we were talking offline before we got up here about trying to find a few silver linings in all of this, and they are there. They're kind of hard to see right now, and they're overshadowed by some of the challenges that we're facing. But if we step back and look at some of those silver linings, one of them is that there is so much more focus and energy being placed on relationship building with our children and our students right now across the country for many different reasons. And just having those 10 days of professional development before school started, it's not something we would have ever wished to have to do, to delay the school year and have them learn these things, but those are skills that will benefit students this year, and it'll benefit students next year, and the teachers will feel more empowered to ask difficult questions that maybe they used to be a little bit shy about asking or not know how to respond very well. And we're doing the same thing for parents, which is we have to be talking with our kids, and we shouldn't lead off with, what are you scared of? We should lead off with, what are you thinking about all of this? What are the thoughts that come into your mind, or what stands out to you? And if it leads to concerns, then it's appropriate to talk about them. But one of the amazing things about children is resiliency in a natural form, and we can harness it, we can teach it and improve it and help them carry it into adulthood. But children in general are incredibly resilient, and they're still learning how to navigate the world. And so, I'm amazed sometimes when I ask kids, what are you thinking? And I think I have it in my mind that I know what they're going to say, and they'll say something totally different. Like, I've kind of liked staying home and having breakfast with you every day. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I was thinking you were going to be upset that you're missing your friends and your teachers, but, talk about a silver lining. So, as Dr. Dixon was saying, I think, the most important thing that we can do is just give kids that safe place to talk about all of this and provide them with room to express both positive and negative emotions, and to know that that's an okay thing to feel right now, and that we're all here as adults to help them through these difficult times, and to teach them new things, and to sometimes highlight the positives when they're hard to see.
One of the things we've tried to do with parents is offer weekly, they're called face-to-face meetings, family and community engagement meetings for families that they can join in on online. They can ask questions, they can get information about what's happening moving forward with the district. And one of the biggest pieces to that is starting out by thanking parents, thanking them for asking the questions, for being concerned. They're worried about all of these little pieces that are coming together, and, are we spending too much time at home? Are we spending too much time at school? And they're so worried and so concerned, and just saying, you know what, that's a good thing that you're concerned. That means you're thinking about your child. You're putting your child's needs first. Just by acknowledging that, it can calm so many feelings for families. Even if we don't have the answer to the question, just saying, you're doing a great job. This is really hard. This is really demanding. And you're doing it. And you're showing your child that even though things aren't going as planned, you can still make a path for yourself. And so going into the start of school with that attitude that, you know what, this doesn't look how we want it to look. This doesn't feel how we want it to feel. But we're going to show up with a good attitude because that's our job. Your teachers are going to come to you with everything you need, and you're going to show up with a good attitude. That alone takes the child into a different place, into a different mindset. So just working with families and talking to them and calming their fears is so important because we have so much on our plates as parents, and we don't want to mess up. These are our perfect little beings. We don't want to mess them up. So that approach that we get to talk about this, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to show your child you're scared. But the way that you react to that is much more important than the feelings you're actually having. As we're going forward into school, one of the things that I think is really interesting, going back to when school ended, was my daughter liked her Zoom meetings because her teacher and her friends could see her house. She could hold up her cat. That personal connection actually means a lot to some kids, that they're letting down this wall and letting their community, because it's their school community, they're letting them into a bigger part of their life. For some teachers, that gives a lot of insight into behavior or the way a child behaves, just seeing their home environment. That actually, while it may not be great, it's a plus because teachers are gaining information. So this is another opportunity for teachers to get to see, how is my child at home? How is the student at home? And adding elements to help them succeed. I think it's going to be great. I think my kid is going to continue to want to hold her cat up, and for everyone to see as much as she can. She's excited to see her teacher. She's excited to see her friends. Even if it isn't in person, they talk about what's going to happen when they finally see each other again. They daydream about that. That's resilience. That's them knowing that this is going to end. So as parents and adults, if we can try to emphasize that with them, hey, your kid knows this is going to end. They're going to be okay. We need to take a step back and just know that we're okay too. I think that's important.
Well, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, but listening to you talk about this dialogue, it is true in our house that many of the insights around the positive ways to cope with this are me learning from my kids. It kind of turns some of that around because that issue of adaptability, I would like to think of myself as adaptable, but sometimes I'm not. And I think kind of learning that being a dialogue and not an instruction is so important. I have a couple practical questions. So, we learned some things since March, working virtually ourselves or helping our children. For example, constant virtual meetings are exhausting, even more than in person. How do we help our kids with that? Here's another one, space. How do we create spaces where children can focus and work? What does that look like? Technology. Not everyone has the same access to reliable virtual tools. How do we compensate for that and achieve equity and access to education? So kind of what are some of those practical things to solve for that we can do in our own homes to really address whether it's exhaustion or do you have a space to work or how's the technology going? What are some thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a
No,
huge
please go.
advocate for letting your child pick their space to learn. And that's something that we have pushed at ACOL Kenwood. If your kid needs to be at a table with posters and that set up space for them and sitting, if that works for them, that's what you should do. I have a kid who likes to sprawl out on the floor, and she sets her, laptop up, and she lays there. She's working productively, and she's happy. That's the space she should be working in. So really knowing your child. If you have a kid who needs lots of breaks, then they need to be doing jumping jacks, in between Zoom sessions, or you need to find some outlet for them because they're not going to learn unless they're getting those breaks, unless they're learning in a way that works for them. At school, our teachers modify that learning all day long, and they know what each child needs. So this is a learning curve for parents and for kids, how to self-regulate, how to know when you're tired, how to know when you need a break. Those are good skills to have. So find that space for your kid. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to turn your living room into a home office. I have a plastic tub with all of my child's things in it. She can pull it out, she can put it away. It's hers, it's her space, they're her things. That's what she needs, and that's what she's gonna use. So, I often tell the big kids, please don't Zoom from your bedroom with posters that may not be appropriate. But, for the most part, find that space where you feel cozy. If you want a poof chair and you want to sit there and work all day, okay. It's not hurting anyone. You're still learning. So, that's something I really advocate for with the kids and with parents. Like, it doesn't have to be the way you see it in your head. Again, be a little adaptable. Let them have their space. This is school, but it's different. So, I really push for that with families.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few things about feeling levels of fatigue and difficulty with changing some of the habits. And as a psychologist, I think of all of this as a form of a habit. And we have our routines. Adults' routines are usually quite well ingrained, which, Greg, might be why we as adults don't necessarily just pivot and flex quite as quickly as our kids do, because we've probably developed things over periods of years that make us feel comfortable and safe. And what it really does is habits help remove some of the cognitive burden every day of thinking through every activity we have to do. And it's the same thing. If you notice yourself getting to work and you don't even remember getting in your car, it's because it's a habit. And if you notice yourself laying out your outfit every night before work, that's a habit, and preparing lunch a certain way. And so when our schedule is totally flipped on its head, it becomes more burdensome from a cognitive standpoint because we have to think about what's next, how do I use this technology, how do I log in? And for me, I do virtual meetings using a minimum of 5 different platforms. And so it's like, okay, well, I got this one set up, but this one, the speaker doesn't work right, and this one, the microphone doesn't work right, and the background's weird on this one. So that's where the fatigue part comes in. And it's not actually the meetings, those are probably no different than what we're used to. It's breaking that routine. And so for our kids, thinking back to an educational setting, as adults, we really need to help them form new routines that are going to help reduce those burdens on them. And so those are things like creating a functional schedule for the day. And some kids might like a really regimented schedule. Like my daughter really likes to know, like, after this is this and after this is this. Other kids might need to be wake up time, school time, break time, lunch time, and a little bit more loose. But having something where they can develop a system of expectations every day will really help them with the fatigue part and help them focus on the school and the learning aspect. Because school, if nothing else, for most kids, it's really routine. They know where they're supposed to be. You know, the first week of school might be a little bit of like, where am I going? But after that, same classroom, same teacher, same activities every day. And so we need to create that at home as much as we possibly can. And then thinking about, you know, for my daughter, she started off with just online school, but it's looking like she might go back to kind of a mixed thing here in the next month or so. And so we're actually creating 2 different schedules. Here's a home day schedule and here's a school day schedule, right? And what do we have to do now on school days that we've never had to do? You have to remember your mask. You have to remember an extra mask. You have to like think through things in a different way. And so we're just preparing ahead of time so that when those days come, that she just looks at the schedule and knows, okay, I got it down. I know what's going to happen.
I admire your schedules because I often can't tell if it's Tuesday or Saturday. So, Dr. Dixon, thought?
So, you know, they have their space, right? Now they have their schedule. So how do we make sure they have access to technology? Right? And so that was critical for Columbus City Schools because prior to COVID, we were not a one-to-one school district. So we literally had to take computers, borrow computers from our schools and loan them to parents. So we loaned out over 19,000 computers, and then we partnered with organizations to provide hotspots. So we said, okay, you have a Chromebook, you're fine, parents. And then some parents said, well, I need more than one Chromebook. You know, I have 2 or 3 kids, I need 2. Then we learned, oh my gosh, I need Wi-Fi. You know, in our minds, we learned, wow, you know, Wi-Fi has to be a public utility. Everyone has to have access to it, so we're working on that. But we had partners who stepped up and provided hotspots for us. So now, and I know you've learned, we partnered with the city, and the city gave us $7 million of their CARES Act funds, and we were able to buy 20,000 computers. So now we have enough computers to start the school year that every family who needs a computer will have access to a computer, a Chromebook, a laptop, and every family who needs access to Wi-Fi will have it. Because it doesn't matter if you have the space or the schedule, you have to be able to utilize, you know, you have to have the tool to access the curriculum. And again, that's when an equity issue comes, right? You know, it can't be because you live on one side of town or that you may be a vulnerable youth, you living in a homeless shelter, or you have some transitional housing, you need that Chromebook. That Chromebook should be like a textbook, right? So many districts aren't buying textbooks anymore because everything is on that Chromebook. So that was important to us. And then we had to move to making sure teachers could use it. Now, Zoom is now the big thing. You know, what platforms do you use? How do you make sure students can utilize that technology? Because we know they can take you know, they use technology all the time. They're always on the computers, or they're using their phones. That is you know, it's tethered to them. But how can we make sure they use those devices responsibly, right? But also how teachers can really elevate learning using technology and make lessons fun. And so that has been What we've been working on too, during these 10 days of professional development, also in summer school, we had 300 teachers who worked in summer school and provided some powerful lessons for our students to work on. So all of our students will have access to a Chromebook. Families will have access to a hotspot if they need Wi-Fi. And we're working to make sure that by 2023, all of our students will have their own Chromebook when they come to school every day. So they will this fall, but we're using some of the ones that we're replacing from our other schools. But that's the goal, out with the books, in with technology. And the last thing I would say about that, if school districts, when this COVID is over, we should not come back to what we left. We have to use this opportunity to have a better outreach and build relationships with our parents, our local partners, and learning is going to look very different from our students moving forward. And so we're looking forward to the opportunity to really leverage technology and leverage this opportunity to make learning more fun, more engaging for our students and our families.
That's great.
And that, to add on to that really quickly, that it reminds me of a principle of positive psychology called falling up. And it's the idea that for some people, when they face adversity, when they face trials and tribulations, no matter how damaging or severe we might objectively think of them as being, they end up having growth opportunities come out of that. And so while we don't prescribe adversity to people, right, none of us would say, hey, let's give everyone a bunch of adversity and just hope that they grow from it. It's just a natural part of life. It's what we all face, no matter who you are and where you live. And so, this idea of let's not try and revert back to, I've heard a lot of people say, I want 2019 back. Well, I don't. I want 2021 and all the great things that are going to be learned and the slingshot forward that we are having right now. And hopefully some of the other issues that we've talked about, the racial injustices and things, that it's hard to separate those layers going on in society right now. But if this can be a moment to slingshot ourselves forward in an educational fashion, I'm 100% for that. And that's a really important thing to think of when you're facing an adversity like this, is how can I learn and benefit and grow from this experience? So
and I think if I could add one more point to that, we've already seen it. Just think about how the communities are coming together now. And it's unbelievable. And I think that's what makes communities stronger, that now we have to rely on each other more than ever. We're seeing what our next door neighbor needs or the business across the street. I mean, I think we're becoming stronger because we're having to rely on one another in a very different way that I think is even more impactful than the past. So I think that's the power of communities, power of partners, that you identify an issue, a problem, and you work on it together.
Dr. Dixon, do you mean that we're stronger together?
We're stronger together. Yes, yes.
Well,
There's nothing for me as joyful as watching our teachers, so we communicate with an app, the teachers at the school. Nothing is as great as seeing them figure out how to use a new piece of one of our online platforms, the pure joy of them texting out, you guys, this is so cool. I can't wait to share this. I can't wait to do this. There is joy happening, and that's the piece that we really have to share and lean in on, because if we can't laugh at certain things, if we can't find those pieces of happiness, we're done. So, yeah.
Well, this generates a dozen more questions for me. However, it's CMC's tradition to take audience questions as well. Jane Scott, CMC's president, is curating questions from the live stream audience. If you are here in our audience, please remember to keep your microphone timed to the questions, and we thank you for avoiding editorial comments. Jane? Our first question.
We do. We have a question from Tina Pierce. As some districts across the nation innovate to respond to COVID-19, how do you see some of those elements of innovation, such as virtual learning, remaining in our school systems in the future? And I know you've addressed this to some example, but maybe there are some other examples.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pierce. She's one of our wonderful board members. And one of the things that we've been challenged with is making sure that learning is not the same right? So we have courses that we are seeing now that will be better suited possibly working online, right? We can mix a little online courses with some practices at home. So I think it gives us an opportunity to do more blended learning and outreach. We can now connect more students to college courses at our two-year institutions, and our four-year institutions, and those students will have, I think, a different experience, but similar to what they're experiencing now. So I think it's going to allow us to have a broader outreach, allow our students to connect with students across the United States. We did a little bit in pockets before, but this now, it just opens us up to having more innovative discussions, innovative outreach, and really leaning on other partners like our hospitals, right? So we think about how can students have internships, right? We have to rethink that, right? So we're students are not going to be able to maybe go to the hospitals, right, physically, but we can figure out a powerful way for a student to have an enriching experience at a hospital virtually. We have telehealth now, right? How many of us now, we're meeting with our doctors on the screen, is unusual, but I think we use what we're learning to make sure that the future of this work and these experiences for our kids, we're using that technology to move us forward.
Yeah, I would say that the normalization of technology use in education is, we've always used some forms of technology, but it's making years of gains in a short period of time out of being forced to do it. And I think, as you were just mentioning, teachers are finding that there are certain aspects of it that aren't so scary as they seemed a few months ago, and that they're really benefiting from it. They can reach students that might not be able to attend school in person, right? I think of some of my friends in the hospital who are, in the, the cancer units or, other units where historically they had a teacher show up to the hospital periodically to try and do some education. Well, what are some opportunities there for kids who might be homebound for some reason? So there's infinite possibilities for technology to be useful in education and to even the playing field, not even Stevens, but work towards evening the playing field when it comes to some of the disparities in education across the country, because technology reaches everywhere. There's no place that technology can't reach if done right.
So a question that I have, it seems as though we're returning a little bit, or have the opportunity to return a little bit, to the one-room schoolhouse where the youngster, maybe the first grader learned from the fifth grader, learned from the high school students. So you have a mixed age group in one family trying to learn. Are there thoughts about how that might advance the younger children?
I think with online, a lot of the online platforms that our staff are using, there are wonderful opportunities for kids to advance, because a lot of that work is self-paced, and the teachers can check in, they can see where each student is working. So instead of maybe relying on testing for those numbers, they're looking more at these programs that students are using online. It's very quick, you can check in. I wouldn't say that the older students should be teaching the younger students. I wouldn't say that that's their role, because they should be focused on their own education. But definitely some of the online learning platforms are built for that progress and that growth, very much in a Montessori kind of way, I think is the right term to use. And that's nice for parents, that oh, my kid is working ahead, and that's good for them. They're being challenged, that's stimulating. So it's not just, you're not necessarily sitting and waiting for the next thing to be presented to you. You can continue to work at your own pace.
Yeah. And I'd say, you know, the old adage is you learn best by teaching sometimes. And so, you know, while we don't want our third graders teaching kindergarten material to kindergartners, you know, my daughter in second grade, she will often, you know, my son will come up and say, "What are you doing?" And she'll say, "Well, here, I'm learning about addition today, and here's how to do addition." And he's, you know, he partially gets it, but she's learning by explaining it to somebody else, where at school, I think there's a little bit less opportunity for that because they're more on an even playing field. So whether it's reading books to each other or, you know, participating in activities together, it has been fun to watch just as a parent that happen.
We have a question from the audience.
So building on your concept, Dr. Houston, there, you said following up.
Yeah.
You know, that's something as parents, I think we all have to learn to let our children sometimes make a mistake because the lessons can be great from it. But as someone who grew up in a different generation, technology has certainly changed the way kids communicate already.
Yeah.
And I can say for sure my childhood, the formative years of high school, interacting with people in person was such a key part of me learning who I was and how to develop as a human being. As a parent of a teen now that is sitting in front of a computer for classes, what practical advice, what suggestions might you give to a parent on how we can help nurture some of that opportunity for kids to replace that screen contact with their friends? They're seeing them all around like the Brady Bunch on their screen, but how are they seeing one another in backyards and on the marching band field and in other places where they're used to interacting, and that's how they learn about themselves? Any practical suggestions you could offer to a parent?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking of the same things. I think, that idea of socialization is one of the main reasons why we're eager for kids to get back into school whenever it's humanly possible. And practical solutions for when you're at home, I would say a couple things. First of all, making sure that school time and those school virtual meetings are not the only times that they're connecting with friends on more than just a texting level. And, I think of the different levels of communication where, typing, texting, Facebook, Messenger, that's dating my age a little bit probably, but, TikToking back and forth, if you will. But, those are different than a one-on-one or maybe a 3 or 4 person virtual meetup where maybe they're working on a project together, or maybe they're like, let's do homework together this afternoon, and we've got this project that's due, so let's talk for a half an hour on what we're going to focus on, because the real part of school that's important from that standpoint is not only learning who you are, but also getting ideas from other people and, understanding how to work as part of a team and how to work as part of a general student body. And so replacing a little bit of that with outside of school contact is important. While the weather's nice, I've also encouraged, go for a jog together, or if you're someone who plays sports, you can throw a football from more than 6 feet apart, and, don't lick your hands after you throw the football back and forth. But, there's a lot of sports going on around the country right now too. And so there are some safe ways that kids can engage with each other without having to be tight-knit in a classroom where they're, really close up with each other. So I just think creatively as parents about how to push them in those directions for now.
So Robin Randall asks, how can designers and architects help support schools in this time to help the slingshot forward happen? You mentioned the slingshot event. How can architects help?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I know we are going to, we just finished a process with Battelle for Kids, and that is looking at what do we want for our future of our students. What does a Columbus City Schools graduate look like? What are the hopes and dreams and aspirations we have for our students? And part of that is we're going to move to a phase of how do we redesign our school. What are our spaces? What should that look like? And I think the timing is so right for this conversation. And I think what they can do is help us imagine, what could schools look like? What do we need now? How could we get out of desk and rows? And should we be at the tables and computer stations or whatever that looks like? I think that will be an opportunity for us to have those experts to help reimagine. I mean, when you walk into Nationwide Children's Hospital, that place is amazing. You know, you walk in and you don't realize you're in a hospital, right? I think we have to think about that for our school spaces. Now that we're learning that kids are creating their own spaces at home to learn and they're creating their own schedules, how can now we take that into a school building now, and we have students created, they create their spaces, they have different schedules, and we're not going to school from 7 to 3, I think we can use this as an opportunity to really leverage and say our schools of the future should look like this because we've learned, that's that slingshot, we've learned from this experience that we need something, and students want something, and we need something very different.
The days of the computer lab are over.
Gone.
That computer lab needs to be in every classroom. It needs to be incorporated. I think flex space is a beautiful thing in schools. Some of our new buildings have these wonderful flex spaces that are an extension of the classroom, but can be used however the teachers see fit. And that's really cool to see it happen, to see breakout sessions, to see students rolling paper along the floor and working, I'm in an elementary school, so this is what I say. But to see that creativity being used and that technology being used right there. You're not going to the art room necessarily to do art, although art rooms are great. You're not going to the computer lab just for computer. So every room can be an art room. Every room can be a computer lab. You're really bringing all the pieces of education to you instead of breaking them out and going to different places. I think that's what's important. Flex space, flex space, flex space.
Yeah. And that, from the standpoint of, there's a little bit of you don't know what you got until it's gone when we come to schools right now, because I think, parents have always thought of, I send my kids there, they learn some stuff, they come home, and hopefully they learn enough to get to do what they want in life. But now that we're not able to attend school in a typical way, I think we're all realizing how crucial school is to our children's development. And so when we think about redesigning what a school means, we're thinking about the health implications, right? The physical health implications of them not going to school. We're thinking about safe spaces for kids who don't have safe spaces outside of school. And so those are some of the things that I hope we can reimagine for our schools of the future, and integrate things like our school physical health programs, right? Which is where many kids get their primary care. They get their immunizations, which we're pretty far behind on those right now. So how can we integrate some of these services where for our students and for children of that age, school is really their place where they can get lots of developmental services, and learning is one of the most crucial parts, but there are other crucial aspects to learning and development that I think schools already provide without the resources really designed for it. So how could we provide them with those spaces and areas to do that? And so from a design standpoint, I think that could really factor into future school design.
And there are many students who are at school from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. Elementary school students, latchkey starts at 7. It ends at 6. If you're a latchkey kid, you're at school for 11 hours. You're there more than you're home. So shouldn't school feel comfortable and accepting and open? And many of our high schoolers, you get to school early for sports if that's what you're doing, and you stay late into the evening. This is where you're growing, and this is truly your community and your home for those years that you're there, and it should feel that way.
Wow. I have to say I wasn't quite expecting this forum to be so high energy and so positive and so exciting. So thank you. What a great way for us to start Metropolitan Club's fiscal year off. I learned that we learn from our kids. We need to be creative, that help students cope, and that's going to help them in the future. Lots of silver linings. Lots of silver linings, and I think it's going to be really curious for us to look back in 20 years and to think of all the things that COVID created and forced us to rethink and redo that we might not even see now. So thank you all. Next week, we welcome a conversation on the U.S. Census, an important and a once-in-a-decade requirement that everyone in our nation needs to be counted. That will be a very important discussion. Thank you to our sponsors today, the sponsors of our series, OSU Wexner Medical Center and Nationwide Children's Hospital, and Spectrum, who is joining us today as a sponsor as well, to our live stream partners, PNC and the Columbus Dispatch, and to our online virtual seat patrons. Thank you all so much. And let's thank our speakers, Dr. Dixon from Columbus City Schools, Dr. Parker Houston from Nationwide Children's, and Amanda McClafferty from PTO Penwood School. Yes, and Dr. Greg Moody, I keep wanting to elevate you to a doctor. You're going to have to get your doctorate degree someday. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for a lively conversation today. We look forward to seeing you hopefully back in the room next week. If not, please stay safe